Okay, the mollusks. The mollusks are a very interesting group. You're going to go from a relatively primitive group to incredibly sophisticated, highly intelligent group. So these are where we're going to start. You have polyplacophorans, which are the chitons, which are a small group and very primitive, actually, very evolutionarily. These compare to some very old species and mostly extinct species, all the way up to the cephalopods, which are octopi and squid, which are really quite intelligent group. So mollusks go a rather wide range. Mollusks have two body parts, a head and a foot, and you'll see that displayed in a variety of ways. They also have a mantle, and that mantle in most species is responsible for secreting the shell that defines most mollusks. It has been lost in a few of the highly evolved species, but in most cases you'll find that shell. Actually, it's also been lost in a couple not so highly evolved species like a slug, but in most cases you'll find that shell. Then from that shell results a mantle cavity that functions in a variety of ways. You also have bilateral symmetry. In reproduction, you may not find a trochophore larva and some spiral cleavage and coelom formation. The coelom itself is going to be reduced. You're not going to find as much because we're more highly evolved. An open circulatory system still for the most part, except in the cephalopods. Those are the more highly evolved species. And something called a radula, which is a mouth structure used for gleaning food. So we still have that head and foot. It's elongated, it does have a mouth, it is also used, then the foot is used mostly for attachment and locomotion. You will have a visceral mass that extends most of the body, and what it does is house the primary organ systems. You will also, the mantle enfolds the body, but it also secretes the shell, and that's a huge job. Then resulting from that, you have a mantle cavity that functions in gas exchange, excretion, helping eliminate waste, and also expelling reproductive units. Finally, there's this radula. Let me look at it for a minute. A radula is, in this case, like a little conveyor belt filled with teeth. So if you are something like a snail that eats, say, algae that is adhered to the surface of a rock, what you do is the radula moves back and forth and those little teeth scrape it. Scrape the algae off of the surface for you. These little teeth can be replaced. So it functions quite well. I was going to show you. Here's the mantle in a snail. And you'll find the mantle cavity here. Here's where you will find, well, here's the shell. These are the three layers of the shell in a bivalve. So, like a clam. And then the mantle itself is here. Okay, let's go sure. I think I have everything on that. Yep. Okay. The gastropods. These are the snails and the slugs. There are a lot of them. There are many, many gastropods. They undergo a very interesting phenomenon. It's called torsion. It's a 180-degree turn of the visceral mass mantle and mantle cavity during development. So this is what happens. So if you're looking at a snail, you would expect its mouth. Here's what I want you to watch. Here's its mouth. Here's its anus. Okay, so this is a digestive system. That seems pretty logical. However, torsion takes place in development, and this is what happens. There's a twisting. So now we have the digestive system with a giant kink in it, and now here's the mouth, and here's an anus. So that is torsion. It happens in all of them. It's always counterclockwise. It means that the head gets to enter the shell first, because what it does is it moves the mantle cavity. So that's a possible reason for it to happen. It's not really clear why, but it happens. There's also something called shell coiling. The actual shell itself has to turn in a direction. It can be counterclockwise or it can be clockwise. There are some species that have a tendency to go one way, and others, and you will find in populations perhaps a tendency to go one way or the other way. It's usually genetically controlled. That's been studied extensively as well. You can also look at some species have a tendency to have elongated shells versus robust shells. That is generally environmentally controlled because it depends on the predators. So if you have, say, crayfish predators who are going to actually pull you out of your shell, then it's better off if you have an elongate shell, because it's harder to get you pulled out because you're adhered at the back end. That's just physics. Whereas if you have fish, it's better off that are eating you, it's better off to have a robust shell because it's harder for them to get you in their mouth. So there's a small species of snail that resides in streams here where how the shell is going to develop is triggered by the amount of odor in the water from fish or crayfish. Locomotion. The foot is flattened. They do have cilia that help them go over mucus trails, and they're just muscular waves. What are they eating? Many of them scrape algae, as I already described, and other things off of rocks. They have a variety of what they eat. There are a couple other ways that they can. They do have sometimes food are collected with mucus that's in their digestive system. Gas exchange is usually with gills if they're aquatic. Sometimes it can even be with gills if you're on land, as long as the gills stay moist. Okay. Open circulatory system, so the blood bathes all the tissues and the sinuses. The heart is a single ventricle and a single auricle, and it is used to transport nutrients and gases. Their skeleton is hydraulic. Most of them have a shell. You do have slugs in this group as well. Nervous system, they do have 6 ganglia plus a nerve cord, so it's primitive, but it's there. and they have a variety of sensory structures, including eyes, a statocyst, which is used for balance, and an osphadia, which is in the mantle cavity itself. It's located near the lungs, and as far as we can tell, it monitors water currents coming in and out. Excretion, they have a single nephridium. It discharges into the mantle cavity, which is exposed to the environment, or it's adjacent to the mantle cavity in the pulmonates, which are the land dwellers. What they excrete is dependent on if they're on land or in water, because if you're in water, your excrement is discharged into that water, and it's therefore it's already diluted right away, so you can expel much more toxic substances like ammonia. Whereas if you're a land dweller, that's not possible. So you have to take the energy to detoxify your excrement. So land dwellers excrete uric acid. Reproduction. They can be monoecious or dioecious. They have external fertilization. When they copulate, sperm transfer may be between both of them so that they both become pregnant, or it may just be one way. Depends on the species. Eggs are shed singly, so they have one egg at a time, in strings or in masses. So it's either a lump or it's a nice little neat string of pearls. They have trochophores and veligers, larval stages, in this group. So within the gastropods, you have a variety of species. I'm not really going to go into the subclasses in this group. Here's some of your representatives. Want some of the more showy representatives? Okay, the bivalves. Now you're talking about bivalves, two shells, things like clams, oysters, scallops. Shells has a hinge, so it has two valves, two sides to it, and it has a mantle-like sheath and covers the entire body inside. So this is what you're looking at. The two muscles, primary muscles that hold that shell closed, are here or here. The mantle secretes that shell so that the oldest part of the shell is right here, that bump. It's the umbo, and the newest part is here. The shell is laid down in growth events so that you can actually count the number of growth events on the shell by counting the lines, and you can get an idea of the age of a shell. In a bivalve, they have lost the head and the radula. They've extended their gills into a sheath, so they're much larger. And cilia create water currents that go through the mantle cavity, so they're processing through a lot more water than are the other mollusks. That serves two purposes. One, it's obviously largely oxygenating them, but it is also serving for food acquisition. So if we look at these graphs, this one is just going to show you oxygenation. So as water passes over the gills, there's more oxygen in the water than there is in the gills, and it's going to passively diffuse into the gills. And so and then the blood system will pick it up. But for food acquisition, water is going to come in over the gills. Labial palps are going to collect any food that's in that water. Then whatever's waste is going to go back out. Water's going to already have to, excuse me, come in and go back out for respiration. So they're just maximizing this. This is mucus. They can also extend a mucousy covered foot into the substrate and collect food off of it that way with labial palps. The other thing that they can do is that some of them have this little crystalline style located just inside the mouth. This has obviously been taken out of the picture here. In this, the crystalline style rotates and it grinds against part of the stomach. See, inside of the stomach. And that releases enzymes and it initiates extracellular digestion of the mucus-bound food. So the food already has mucus on it. The products that have been processed are passed into the diverticula, where then intracellular digestion occurs. So that's just another way that they can digest and acquire food. They also still have an open circulatory system. They have nephridia for excretion, which is open below the pericardial cavity. They have a nervous system, which consists of ganglia and sensory receptors in the mantle margin. Reproductively, most of them are dioecious. The gonads exist within the visceral mass, and they go through external fertilization. That external fertilization results in trochophore and veliger larval stages. In one species, there is the larval stage is actually parasitic. That is located within the Unionidae family. It's a freshwater species. So here we have some bivalve species. This is actually a lure. So it's there to attract food to them. More bivalves, more bivalves, more bivalves, a very odd bivalve. And finally, the cephalopods. So these are squid, octopi, cuttlefish, nautilus. All of them have lost or significantly reduced their shell, with the exception of the nautilus, which appears sort of like a giant snail, but is much more sophisticated, has tentacles, and inside of the shell, his shell is actually chambered, has individual sections in it. That's why it's called a chambered nautilus. Foot has been modified into tentacles or arms and incorporated into a siphon. That siphon serves for locomotion largely. So here is a squid. Here are the tentacles. Very large, sophisticated eyes. You can't see. Oh, yeah, here's the siphon. Jet propulsion is what it works for. I already said that. They are predatory. They do have a digestive tract. Closed circulatory system here. They have very large brains. They have complicated eyes. They have complicated statocysts for balance. They also have chromatophores, which are responsible for color change that is brain controlled. So it's very quick color change. It's used for courtship. It's used for protection. Their eyes focus in the same way that ours do, and they have almost the same level of sophistication. They also have ink glands, many of them, that are used for protection. So if a predator is approaching them, they release something that's referred to as ink, and it creates a smoke screen, essentially, so that they can escape. Learning. They have the capability to problem solve, and which has served them very well. Very well. They are dioecious. Males produce spermatophores, which are little packets of sperm, and the females transfer those spermatophores into the mantle cavity using a very specific tentacle. The eggs are then deposited in and attached to substrate. Typically, the females tend the eggs. Possibly the males tend as well, and they do exhibit some form of parental care in that way. Polyplacophores, we went from the very highly sophisticated back down to the bottom. These are the chitons. They have reduced head, flattened foot. Shell consists of exactly 8 flattened plates. Here they are, polyplacophorans. They have a very muscular mantle that goes beyond the margin. They feed on algae. They have, oh, I don't have it. They have a ladder-like nervous system, so it's like goes like almost follows their plates, and then has 2 lines down each side. And they're dioecious with external fertilization. Finally, the Scaphopoda. These are the tooth shells or tusk shells. I'm not going to say too much about them, just so that you know that you've seen one. They are, and that they belong with the mollusks. I want to show you what one looks like. The shells open at both ends. They burrow, and they are dioecious.